week's edition of the Wellbeing Show. I've got a great guest, Frank Mullane, who's the CEO of Advocacy after fatal domestic abuse. And we're going to be catching up with him. Interesting guy with a very interesting life story, which I'm really, really excited to sort of talk to him about. Before we do that, just to say this is a live podcast. I'm old-fashioned. I like live podcasts as opposed to recorded ones. So if you're listening to this on the 3rd of May at 9 p.m. UK time, we're on the air. And please do drop us a line or drop me a message on WhatsApp 07506 319 745. Add a +44, obviously, if you're doing it from outside the UK. And drop us a message if you've got any comments or thoughts to share with us and any questions that I can put to Frank, or just even telling me to shut up, which is usually a good thing to do because I do ramble on a bit too much. So always good to be reminded of that. Enough of that. Welcome, Frank. It's great to have you. And it's been a bit of a journey to get you on the show because of me, because you originally booked on some time ago and then I pulled out. Was it illness or had the dog eaten my essay? I can't remember what it was. I think I was ill.
I don't know, but thank you for a very warm welcome.
It's great to have you. I'm glad you've made it finally. And I'm really interested. And so you're the CEO of a charity, which you've been running, you said, for 15 years now. Is that right?
So I set this charity up in 2008.
Yeah. Wow, that's a long time. And it's an interesting, well, is that the right word? It's a powerful topic, advocacy after fatal domestic abuse. And it's also slightly unusual to find a man in the field in that area of work around domestic abuse as an advocate, a person who supports. Because obviously you know the figures that it is male violence towards women. And so it's really good to have sort of a guy on talking about not being a perpetrator, but being somebody who wants to challenge what's going on and improve things. So that's a really powerful message, I think, and really important to hear. So you set the charity up after a quite horrific personal tragedy within the family, wasn't it?
Yeah, my sister and nephew were murdered in domestic abuse by their husband and father, and I was trying to keep them alive. I was ignorant. So the kind of help I was trying to give was the John Wayne help, or the Eastwood type of help. Trying to be a loving brother, trying to be strong for them, but completely ignorant of how to save somebody's life who has a real threat from somebody, their partner.
Yeah.
Now, I did not understand, although my sister was telling me this guy was going to kill her. She told me, this guy will kill me. He'll keep trying until he stops.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of taking that in now and not taking it in.
Yeah. So I'm just going to stop there because you and I talked before the show yesterday about this idea of triggers and how we're going to be talking about very powerful stuff that it can be very triggering for some people who may have experienced it in the past or indeed in it now. And so this is our first trigger warning, if you like, or the first potential trigger, which is around domestic violence leading to homicide. So what I want to say, and you might want to say something as well, Frank, is that if you're in a situation where you're afraid of your intimate partner, that's wrong. You shouldn't be afraid for the person who's your intimate partner, and you need help. And you'll need proper help, and you'll need legal help and police help, and there are organizations that you can go to. One of the biggest organizations that you can contact are called Refuge, which James will put a link out to, and they can signpost you. They will, if you reach out to them, they will reach back to you, and they'll do it in a safe way so that your abusive partner won't know, and they'll keep you safe. And they're a great way to find out the types of resources that you can use as a victim to get to a place of safety. And the most important thing is that you can get to a place of safety, that you don't stay in the dangerous environment. Frank, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, always take professional advice on this. There are ways of getting to safety which are safer than other ways, okay? Just leaving a dangerous relationship can be an incredibly dangerous thing to do without having other types of planning and victim care wrapped around. So please take professional advice from organisations like Refuge, or the National Domestic Violence Helpline. If James could put the number up, I'd be grateful. It's very easy for people.
So James will put the National Domestic Violence Helpline up there as well, plus a link to them. And I want to reiterate that that just getting advice off the internet is not a sensible thing. You want to talk to professionals in the field who understand the situation, and they definitely will take your situation seriously. They really will. And they will know how to safely get you to a place, you and often your children, because we're talking about children as well, get you to a place of safety so that the violence, the abuse can stop, and you can get the support and help you need to sort of rebuild your life.
Sorry, Noel, can I just add, it's important to add there that some people won't be able to leave and won't to leave, and there is also advice and help for those people to stay safe when it comes to stay at the location for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. But the bottom line here, folks, is make sure you get hold of proper professional advice on your particular circumstances, and listen to that advice. Take it, get the help. And sometimes these things take a long time. It's not easy. It's a sort of big thing to do, because domestic abuse very rarely just suddenly appears one day in a relationship. It's usually the grooming has taken place over a long period of time, or the person may have any vulnerabilities from their own childhood, may have been brought up in that environment and may be programmed in some way to expect it and believe that. But it's not your just desserts. You are allowed to have a better life than that. So again, caution, professional advice. So I'm going to come back, if you like, Frank, to so you as an amateur, like a member of the family, were out of your depth, which I think most people would be, to be honest. So I hope you don't beat yourself up about that. That's just the truth, that we would try. So what was, from your perspective, if you don't mind, what was it like witnessing these things? What was your experience back then?
Frustrating. I was very naive. I thought that he would be frightened of me, and he was nervous of me, but I think that the difficulty is the dichotomy that I was telling my sister I believed her when she said this guy's going to kill me. I think I'm not a psychologist, but there must be something about the human condition which prefers to think of the most benign outcome. It won't happen. He's not going to kill her, and I can deal with that, and I'll try and sort of stay safe and be at the house. Quite often, I was often staying at the house. I think there's something is capable of holding those two different thoughts in the same brain. Yes, I'm believing you, Julie. You're telling me this guy's going to kill you. And actually, the other part of my mind is saying it's very unlikely. I'll stay around and make sure she's safe. Completely naive. Yeah. Completely useless, by the way, as a defense against a person planning murder.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess that a lot of people would identify with that, who are witnessing friends, loved ones, family members experiencing this, because the knowledge around these issues is very poor. And it's not a polite subject. It's not something that you bring up around the dinner table with your friends when you're out. It isn't. And it's a difficult and challenging subject. And I'm going to be, I don't often talk about me because this show isn't about me, but I am an adult survivor of very serious violence in my childhood, and sort of witnessing my father, for example, behave in ways that made me think he wanted to kill my mum. And he probably did want to, and it is probably lucky that he didn't, in many ways, just simple dumb luck. But my mum did have to leave, and that was very difficult in those days because she had to leave us behind, which was a very difficult decision for her to make. But she had to do it, and on reflection as an adult, I can look at that decision as one of the most courageous things I've ever seen, to be honest. And also, in terms of the decision she made, it vastly improved our lives, because ultimately she was able to get a new home, get a new relationship, and bring the kids with her, bring us with her. And the second half of our childhood was much more stable, and certainly not as frightening. So I think that's quite important stuff to share, that there are ways out of these things.
No, can I just go back and point? The reason why I share what I've just shared about not knowing how to keep someone safe is not to elicit sympathy.
Yeah.
Okay? The reason I'm saying it is because I want to see it exactly for what it is, so that I can try and do something about it. So I'm part of a project, something I've been looking for over 15 years now, and I've found it. We are trying to educate people in the community, not Joe Blogs, brothers, sisters, family members, how to help their loved ones when they know they're suffering domestic abuse. So we've got to see it really clearly in order to create any form of change, as you know.
Absolutely. I guess one of the things that does happen, even when there's not a homicide, because people would think of that as extreme, but it's actually, in terms of domestic abuse, it's a real possibility. People need to bear that in mind, that death is an outcome if this situation isn't taken seriously. But even if somebody survives it, they may have lifelong psychological scars that they have to manage, and the children will also. And so it is a very serious subject. In terms of, I mean, it is, I think, difficult for people to accept it's real and the severity of it. And I think there is still, like, I'm going to give you an anecdote, which I don't know how true it would still be today, but it's illustrative of how this subject used to be talked about, and maybe still is in some places. But I remember I was working up in Scotland, and this is 20 years ago, and I was working with a family as a carer, actually. Or no, maybe it's 30 years ago now, to be honest. I am that old. I forget how old I am, Frank, to be honest. It was 30 years ago. And I was in a queue in a supermarket getting the, what I call the messages, shopping. In Scotland, they call them messages, for the people I was working for. And there was two women behind me in the shopping queue, one of whom had, a blackened eye and a bruised face, and discussing openly how she'd been beaten up by a partner the night before, and it was normal, and it was being laughed and joked about. It was not being taken as a serious subject that had to be sort of dealt with. I think we would be shocked if we heard that in a shopping queue now, but there is still a sense in which I think that it is somehow thought of as maybe now as something that happens to a few people. But I don't think the stats show that the numbers have dropped particularly, but you would know more about that than me, Frank. Where are we with that sort of stuff, do you think?
The prevalence of domestic abuse has not stopped, and the prevalence of domestic homicide has not reduced, actually. It's remained fairly static for many years. But what's also important to know is that there are many deaths from domestic abuse which are not homicides. So on available research, we believe there are more suicides than there are homicides in domestic abuse. Certainly for women, there isn't much research for men, although 3 times as many men make their lives as women every year in this country. So there are going to be some of those, I speculate, as of abuse. But there's also lots of unexplained deaths, falls from apartments,
that's right,
in attendance, so-called mercy killings, dementia killings, those kinds of things. A lady in Wales called guy who was murdered, but by the coroner and the police for 4 years as a natural death until one of the killers started to boast about what he'd done to a girlfriend.
Yes.
So there's other I wouldn't say hard research, but other indications that there are multiple hidden homicides in this country every week due to domestic abuse. And that's pretty unnerving.
Yeah.
So what we don't know, Noel, what nobody knows is the amount of people that die as a domestic abuse. In other words, a death which is either directly traceable to domestic abuse or somehow traceable back to domestic abuse.
Yeah. And why do you think we don't know, Frank? Why don't we know? Because we know so much about the causes of death and why people. You can go and get this information, download it from the Office of National Statistics, but we don't know. How is it we don't know, Frank?
Well, it's quite hard to measure the persons that would die because of suicide, for example, because there could be multiple factors in history. Also, deaths will be for another reason. So there is emerging information now that talks about certain medical conditions that people die of, and it'll be recorded as that medical condition. It may have been caused by the stress of domestic abuse.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of deaths. So it's not easily measured. It's not recorded in the Office of National Statistics. Most of the deaths due to domestic abuse are not recorded.
Yeah.
In the Office of National Statistics. It's just the homicides that are.
Yeah.
There's about 6 or 7 homicides every year in this country, in England and Wales.
Yeah.
Just under a third of those or so are about from domestic abuse, domestic homicides.
Yeah, I must say, I'm going to say to you, for people who are listening live, that I might come back and ask you to repeat some things, Frank, because the line is at times quite poor, and so certain words are dropping out. If somebody's listening and they do want that to happen, just drop us a message, 07506 319 745. We can circle back. I think there's just an issue about the buffering in your sort of wireless connection. But I want to soldier on because I think it's such an important topic, and it's one that I'm personally connected to, having grown up with this. And I spent quite a long time professionally sitting on the domestic violence reduction team within a local authority. And so I got professionally involved in these things as well. So I'm quite an advocate around the area, I think. And it is interesting that I think there's a lot of guys who have this other side of the experience, but often don't talk about it. Don't talk about, and guys like me who grew up with it, for example, and have sort of had to. I've got lots of treatment for it, and I'm very lucky that I've been able to do that. I'm going to come back a little bit to why we don't know, because I'm also going to sort of probe a little bit, because my sense would be that partly why we don't know is because we're not joining up the dots between the various bits of information. And I'm guessing, I don't know this for certain, but that the response to domestic abuse is still quite poor from many agencies. That despite what they say, if we look at, for example, some of the investigations that have been happening around Metropolitan Police and their lack of response to gender-based crime, for example, and actually perpetrating gender-based crime, and often domestic abuse is thought of in the context of gender sort of based crime, then I suspect dots are not being joined up, and that's why we're not getting the information that or making the links between why somebody has died and or the connections, the stressors. So, for example, we know in psychological research, we have these things called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And we can attribute certain types of outcomes to certain types of adverse childhood experiences. And we can, for example, know that trauma will produce certain types of medical problems later in life unless it's treated, in terms of the degradation of internal organs. So there is, I think, quite a lot of information, but I wonder whether or not, as a country, we're doing that piece of research to make us understand this subject properly.
Well, if domestic abuse is seen as a public health issue,
yes,
that might change things.
That's a much better way of saying the rambling stuff I've just said. That's exactly right. That's hitting it on the nail, hitting the nail on the head, that it is a public health issue. And it's interesting, isn't it? We think about Glasgow has virtually stopped its epidemic of knife crime by treating it as a public health issue rather than as a criminal justice matter. And yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting piece of work that Glasgow did, because Glasgow was famous for knife crime. It was part of the folklore of Glasgow to have a knife and use it, and they virtually eliminated it, which is interesting.
Well, what's being introduced shortly in this country, there's a pilot at the moment, there's something called offensive weapon homicide reviews,
right,
which I think is trying to get at the numbers of young people killed in knife crime on the streets. Yeah. So that's an attempt to try and understand these killings and work out ways to prevent them.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, if you look at them and model them as though they were infectious disease, it actually works, because you can target resources on stopping the infection spreading. And we've all become epidemiological experts since COVID, to be honest. So we should all be up for it. I'm interested in how, apart from the tragic life events, I'm interested in how you got into the field of your own personal journey, if you like. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind if we went back a little bit in time and talked a little bit about you, because I'm intimately, or rather I'm very much sort of passionate about trying to understand why certain people transform tragedy into something that improves the world, and other people might go under and other people survive it. And I'm not judging any of those positions. I think they all make sense to me, but I'm just interested in this sort of transformation stuff. And you're one of those people that have chosen and been able to transform this tragedy into something that helps the world and improves the world. So,
well, I don't judge it either, because you know, I felt a compulsion. So I'm an alcoholic. I'm 15 years sober,
yeah,
thankfully.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My brother took his own life 2 years before we had the murders, and I think my family was still grieving that suicide,
right,
trying to understand, feeling, you know, we didn't do enough, trying to understand, etc. when the murders hit us. But I think that the sort of compulsion for me to the charity, it took 5 years, first of all, for my family to get the answers out of the police force that we sought.
yeah.
So we wanted three things, really. Number one, you tell the story of this domestic homicide accurately, that you answer our questions, which you are so far avoiding in some steps. And thirdly, you evidence to us that you are going to make changes. So we brought a very thorough and strong challenge to that police force, and it took 5 years.
Yeah.
Eventually, we've reached a point at which we felt that we could go about our lives ordinarily again, if you like.
Yes. So some sense of justice, possibly, or closure.
Well, the justice for us was that we knew the story. It had been publicly narrated correctly. We had made a police force concede its failures right up to the highest level,
right,
and make sure that it reached the top agendas in that police force, that they would make changes. Now, you know, some point, and I you know, I've got OCD, and I you know how that can be, that you want sort of more than sometimes is achievable. It's quite proud, because I was able to reach a point at which we could agree as a family that, this is okay. We've done very well here, and we can say, let's go about our lives again.
Yeah.
And for me, that was about setting up this charity. It's not quite as noble as it sounds. So I was working in
It never
nationwide.
is. It's okay.
Oh, and let's be completely truthful here.
Yeah.
So I was working in Nationwide Building Society.
Right.
Suddenly got 2 promotions in those 5 years. I think I just became skilled at making my point. I was then told, that the next appraisal, I was in trouble because I was still running a domestic violence campaign from Nationwide, if you like. They were very good to me. They really looked after me, but I think time ran out on me.
Yeah.
And I was going, and I knew I was going to be in trouble. So I was able to take a redundancy package.
Right.
Decided to start the charity, and that I was able to use that redundancy package to fund me for the first year. And of course, I was completely riven by this and completely passionate about it because I was being contacted by families that didn't have my confidence, didn't have some of that confidence wasn't necessarily, some of it was bluff, but somehow I managed to run a successful campaign to get facts and create change. And I wanted to help other families do that. Without wishing to sound arrogant, I could see did not have the confidence to do it or how to do it. Of course, I learned things along the way. And I'd also been checked and challenged. I mean, I remember somebody saying to me once, look, Frank, when you go to meet this chief executive of the local authority, just stand inside his shoes and think what it's like for him to meet Frank Mullane when he's angry. And I hadn't thought of that. But, the advice, it was very good advice. And I think about things that way a bit more strategically and think, wow, if I can make my objectives be the same as what this bloke is looking for, there's a good chance we can achieve them.
Yeah, strategic thinking is always a useful skill and tool to have. So we glossed over a little bit about I'm an alcoholic. That in itself is quite a significant transformation in life, to go from active alcoholism to, would you say you're in recovery now? What's the terminology that you're comfortable with?
We always say we are still in recovery. So
Right.
I still go to AA meetings. I started the pandemic, I've started to return to it. And I think I always will. Not as frequent as I used to be, but the 12-step program, which is used for all sorts of addiction, includes trying to give back as well. And and I'm not I still need my own journey through the steps fully and properly, and I'm doing that now with a sponsor, and that's 15 years on. So I've done some of the steps and not all 12.
Yeah,
it could be done all 12 in a small way, but you need to refresh and renew.
And for people who don't know, you can Google 12-step programs and 12-step recovery. Started by AA 80 plus years ago, and it's a structured way of thinking about staying sober once you decide. What was it that brought you to the point where you felt, I need to stop drinking? Or was it not like that? How did you reach that point? What was it like during the active phase, and what brought you to deciding?
Well, the active phase, I started to be drinking alone, sometimes in pubs, getting a bit pathetic.
Yeah.
I was still drinking after the murders, and people feel sorry for you. And I actually remember, and this is pathetic, but it's true, I remember thinking, actually, having alcoholism as a career is now worth the choice, because I am going to get a lot of sympathy because of these tragedies in my life.
Yeah.
I could actually go for this and be an alcoholic, and but I actually thought, this is a legitimate choice. But actually, I got beaten up one night, and I felt utterly humiliated.
Okay.
And I remember, after being beaten up, walking into a pub, knowing that I would have bruises, thinking that'd be a good image to walk into a pub with. I was still ego-driven and just crazy thinking. And I remember the next day, my mother was horrified, and just that was it. And I went into an AA meeting 2 days later, and I liked what I heard. Not everything I heard. I remember a man came up to me at the end of that meeting, and he said, "Did you hear things you did not enjoy tonight?" I said, "Yeah." "Did you hear things that you liked?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you remember them and come back next week."
Hmm.
And I did, because the man who spoke to me was also an alcoholic. And I thought, wow, you've been in the gutter, mate, looking at like me. I wasn't speaking to a professor who'd done a degree in alcoholism and was now teaching like me. It was a strange thing, but I felt a little bit of growing up, really.
Yeah.
And I've been very lucky, because it appealed to me. I was ready to give up. I was becoming more and more vulnerable in pubs. Pubs are dangerous environments for men. It's for women, but they can also be dangerous for men, from other men.
Yeah, and definitely, and also alcohol is a danger. It produces violence because it changes the amygdala and threat mechanisms and facial recognition. So there's a lot of violence associated with alcohol, full stop, whether one would define oneself as an alcoholic or not. The two go hand in hand. So alcohol-fueled environments are dangerous environments. That's just a fact.
Yeah, alcohol never made me violent.
Yeah, yeah.
Alcoholic violent. You are in positions in which violence is likely to be visited on you.
That's the point. The health and safety side of things, whether you're a perpetrator or a victim, the risk goes through the roof once you start adding alcohol into the mix. What sort of alcohol, do you mind if I ask this, what sort of alcoholic were you? Because I suppose people still think that alcoholic means that you're homeless, on a park bench, etc., but that's often not the case. Were you? Where did it take you?
So that's a really good question. So I used to think, to be an alcoholic, you had to be sat on a bench, as you just said, in a park somewhere, wearing a brown jacket with a bottle of cider in your pocket, and you didn't have a job. I was always lucky that I kept my jobs. You take time off work, you tell lies to keep your job, where you've been the night before, when people say what's wrong with you, and you have flu every few weeks and all this kind of stuff. I was a binge drinker. I wouldn't drink for some weeks, maybe. But I usually would be drinking very heavily at the weekend, and sometimes in the week, and then get into a really depressed state on a Sunday. And the only way I could get out of that depressed state really was to go on another bender that night, maybe get money out of a credit card, run up debt, and suddenly I'd feel happy again. But then Monday would be a horrible low feeling, even worse. But you go back eventually. So alcoholism is really, when it's just affecting your life so significantly. And look, it was affecting my life. It was affecting my family's life. They would say things to me, and maybe I wouldn't take them in, because addiction is it's very hard to break unless you make the decision, but you can break it. There are methods out there to break it. And I was just very fortunate that I went to one that worked for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, another trigger issue for people who may be listening and thinking, I do have issues around the way I sort of drink or use other substances. I think for a lot of people, when they first hear an alcoholic say, well, I was quite successful in many ways. I got on with my life. I had a job, but it was the emotional stuff. It was the obsessional stuff. It was the effect it had on my mood and my inability to form close relationships with other people. When you start to hear that story, then people can begin to think, actually, maybe this is a bit more like my experience. I have to say, I would say clinically, and I'm quite an advocate for staying away from alcohol, because there's no good reason to drink. And our relationship to alcohol in the UK is a disaster, absolute disaster. But interestingly, since 2015, we've had a public health campaign aimed at kids. encouraging them to see the risks of alcohol. And since 2015, the number of kids starting drinking has dropped by 20%.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Isn't that extraordinary? And they never drink at all. They're just not interested because they are informed about all the risks involved. And there are so many multiple risks with alcohol. I'm not going to get on that soapbox. It's not about whether or not you think yourself an alcoholic. You know, if you go down any high street on a Friday night, you know what the risks are to you, and I wouldn't go. And I'm not going to even have a drink, but I wouldn't go anywhere near those places. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's also falling down the stairs. There's leaving the oven on, and and
all sorts of things. So
fires and.
So I mean, I think it's a complicated subject, and we need to sort of get healthier in this country. So you had this event where you were embarrassed about the way you looked and the fact that you've been beaten up. And you decided to go to AA. Had you heard of AA before? I mean, how did you make that choice?
I would have heard of AA, but it would have been how you hear of 101 things that you know of if somebody asked you a question, but you wouldn't have spent any active time thinking about it. And I did know two people remotely that were in the program. Yeah. Again, I wouldn't have thought about it.
Yeah. And so you just went along. You happened to meet the right person. It worked for you, which is good. And I think that's true. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a significant number of people. And there are many, many other sort of things that that can help you. And again, if you're listening to this and you are concerned about what's going on for you in terms of any substance, I would suggest that the first place you'd want to go is have a chat with your doctor. I'm telling you, GPs know a lot more than you think. It's sort of like you could rock up to your GP and go, I've never told anybody but this. And they'll go, oh, you're drinking or whatever it is. And they'll know. So you won't be surprising or shocking them. And there are brilliant services available for people who have alcohol or substance misuse worries and concerns. There are lots of interventions from your local drug and alcohol team, brief interventions that using a bit of downloadable CBT sort of teaching and coaching stuff that can help you in all sorts of amazing ways. So you don't necessarily have to go to an AA meeting. You can certainly pop along if you're interested in finding out. They'll be very welcoming to you always. But it's not necessarily for you, and it's not necessarily what you need, but there's lots of help. And I would suggest to people that, have a chat with your GP if you're worried about these things, get a health check done, and get some advice on groups and support that's available for you. And also these things like Stoptober, is that how you say it? And Dry January, they're brilliant ideas, I think, because the evidence is quite clear. Even if you stop for a month, you vastly improve your life chances. It's ridiculous how good it is for you. Like stopping smoking. And never quitting. So really, that's the message. Was alcohol and substance issues an issue in your family more broadly? Was it an issue for your brother? No?
No, not for my direct family. My father was teetotal. My mother hardly ever drank.
Right.
My brother drank socially. My two brothers drank socially, and one took his own life from depression. The other one's still alive and hardly drinks at all.
Yeah.
Further into my family, there is some alcoholism, yes.
Yeah. So were they surprised when you came out as an alcoholic, or were they like, oh, finally, thank God he's admitted it?
My wider family, you mean?
Yeah, your family, when you do that, I guess they must know because you're telling everybody.
My direct family, I think everyone knew I was an alcoholic.
Yes,
I was the last one to everyone knew. I think people were at the end of their tether with me, but I'm very lucky to have a very loyal and loving family. But I think I took it to the limit.
Yeah,
I was lucky to stop when I did.
Yeah, and you went into your recovery after the homicides that you experienced. You were still.
I was still drinking in the 5 years that we took our campaign to the police. Yeah.
Right.
drinking to celebrate good meetings with them or to commiserate bad meetings with them.
Yeah.
Look, let's be brutally honest about this. I was sucking up good feeling. I was getting pats on the back.
Yeah.
It was in the media at the time. It's still ego driven, really, and I was enjoying it.
Sure. But it is even more remarkable that you're able to turn this stuff around. I mean, it genuinely is. And I know that you're going to knock me back when I say it's remarkable, because your training in AA will have taught you to be humble. That's sort of, I'm sure you'll get it humble. But it is a remarkable story that, it's this outlier alcoholic emerges. There's a tragedy of your brother taking his own life, tragedy of your sister being murdered, taking the police on, dealing with the fact that you are drinking alcoholically at that time. You're also prone to depression, as you would be from drinking. Whether, I don't know if it was prior to the drinking, but definitely if you drink heavily, it'll give you a mood disorder. You were dealing with all those things, and somehow you got through them to the point where you set up this charity. And that is a remarkable story, Frank.
Well, thank you, but it gave me such a focus,
right,
on which to apply myself. And my normal job, although it was quite a challenging job, no longer interested me. How could I get excited about dealing with objects around mortgages and stuff? And when I was trying to challenge the police about how they handled my sister reporting domestic abuse and how they responded on the night, etc. Your world changes so dramatically. Dramatically is a kind of a overused word, but dramatically. So my world had changed just so much, and it just gave me a focus, and it just it's not I was just extremely driven. I remember my family saying, several members of my family saying, so we were going to meetings with the police, including some friends, maybe an MP, maybe a lawyer sometimes. We would go to these meetings en masse. Several members of my family saying, we have witnessed something broken in this police force. We cannot walk away until we have had one hell of a go at making them fix it.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of my family that we felt that way.
Yeah.
And it's nothing to do with humility or humbleness. It's drivenness.
Yeah. Yeah. And good for you that you took that energy and you harnessed it for something that is of benefit. So tell me about setting up the charity and what you were trying to achieve and what you were achieving once you'd set it up. So you set it up 2008, and for people who don't know, setting up, you can't just set up a charity because it's a legal process. So you have to get the Charities Commission to agree that you can be a charity, because you're going to collect public money, and you have to. I mean, it's a complicated process. I know I've sat on the board of several charities, so it is a very complex legal process. Yeah,
you can set up a charity without Charity Commission status.
Mm-hmm.
It won't become very big. I mean, there's 22 people now in this charity after operating this charity. So, you have to register with the Charity Commission. You have to get board members. The biggest thing is to raise money, or the whole thing's going to fold very shortly.
Yeah.
So, out, gain credibility. You have to start creating information, writing stuff, influencing. You also have to make connections. And I think one of the biggest learning...
I'm just going to stop you for a second. I just want to be clear what we're talking about. You set up a charity about a subject that people do not want to talk about. Do you know? Yeah. It's not just you can set up a charity for sick kids, and that's all right, isn't it?
Donkeys. Do you know what I mean? Donkeys.
Or donkeys, etc., etc. But this is not a light subject that that you'll have a ton of celebrities turning up and saying, I really want to be associated with domestic homicide. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's like you're going upstream, mate. So let's be honest about that, right?
I had to travel here, there, and everywhere just to get checks for $5,000.
Yes, I'm
It's
sure.
not going to last long.
So when you set it up, what did you want to achieve? What were the sort of goals, and what did you do? What practically did you do to sort of help people?
I wanted to help people by advocating for them, for informing them of their rights. What it is, as I perceive, to live in a liberal democracy must mean that a citizen can challenge the agencies that provide services for them.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's written down, it's legal right. It's absolutely quite right.
I know, but you see, my family's experience with the police, I remember my youngest sister saying to me, "Look, Frank, what have we done wrong? Why are they treating us like this?"
Yeah.
I am a bit stubborn. I'm naturally stubborn. I feel a bit,
Get out of here.
don't really feel timid with the police. And I wanted to have a go because I thought this is disgraceful. This is absolutely unfair. How dare you not answer our questions? How dare you not be back? I have to say, though, over the years, I grew in my understanding, began to make great relationships with police forces.
Yeah.
We've now developed an understanding in AAFDA in which I try to help those professionals. We've developed a philosophy in something called domestic homicide reviews, in which I'm trying to raise the status of all parties in this review. So that's, first of all, the status of the deceased by making sure we tell an accurate story. Then the status of the family and the friends who are contributing to the review, make sure they've got expert advocacy, that they're adequately informed and their voices heard. Thirdly, raise the status of professionals, because large organizations are very good beating up their own staff.
Yeah, without doubt.
No doubt about it. So
Yeah.
I would say, let's remove the blame, invite these professionals into the table, and allow them to admit their weaknesses and frustrations.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to achieve in this review process. Now, what I'm speculating is, if we can raise the status of those three parties, that we might somehow create a review environment in which it is more likely that we find that we learning, that we're able to apply.
And that is the crucial thing, because we know mistakes are being made again and again and again because the rates remain the same. Okay. In similar ways, we know mistakes are being made around rape because the conviction rates are less than 1% and are consistently less than 1%. So we know mistakes are being made, but it's very difficult. You're absolutely right. It's very difficult for professionals within the system to go, we're making mistakes. We need some help to figure out what's going wrong. How do we change this?
But it is about trying to see it from a systems perspective. So
yeah,
no one individual is unaffected by the environment around them. They could have a bullying supervisor. They could be untrained and yet put into a difficult role.
Yeah.
They could be having a bad day or what have you. Yeah. So it is about looking at systems and understanding the environments in which people make decisions, the amount of resources as well.
Yeah, I also think it is probably the wrong system. It's the wrong set of tools trying to deal with the problem. Like you said earlier on, if we were beginning to think of it as a public health issue, then we might be getting somewhere. And I agree with you, because I think the tools that you bring to dealing with public health matters are very different to the tools that are brought to trying to investigate a crime, because investigating and prosecuting a crime is a set of tools.
Yeah, but you need both, don't you? You need.
Well, I'm not suggesting you don't need both, but I think that, we are probably looking at it in the wrong way, because there's also, I think, a broader issue. I don't know what you think about this. There's a broader issue about these issues are endemically and systemically built into society. That there's a whole set of collusions that take place around these issues that enable and support them to happen. And the police are one of those systems, but there's a lot of other things that are behind this.
there are multiple agencies and services that it's the combination of those that some would describe that as the coordinated community response is likely to give victims the best chance of exiting those relationships safely. But it's not enough, right, to just make people safe. Because, I'm thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everyone wants to get to that top bit where we able to self-actualize and have the sort of life that we want to have and that we're capable of living. So it's about raising the status of domestic abuse as a crime as well, so that it does attract more resources.
Yes.
We should be horrified, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
1 in 4, or whatever it is, this massive prevalence of domestic abuse and its gendered nature.
Yeah.
Although it's gendered, men do suffer domestic abuse as well. It's just that we know that the rates are skewed towards men.
And severity is often much less as well in terms of the actual harms and outcomes for male victims.
In terms of homicides, it's about 4 to 1 that women will die.
Yeah, absolutely. But also on every level, I think as well, on the sort of levels of physical injury, etc. And I mean, there are these facts, and the most horrifying fact is they haven't shifted in decades.
And the prevalence is horrendous. So when we see political will that will loudly shout about this, louder than it is being shouted about at the moment, we have seen improvements in successive governments talking more loudly about domestic abuse. We've seen the introduction of domestic homicide reviews. We've seen the introduction of independent domestic violence advocates, new orders and powers for the police, etc.
Yeah.
It needs to get even louder.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's an endemic problem. It really is. And so it can only be approached. When you meet the politicians, so I don't want you to name any of them because I know you do meet them, and they have to listen to you, because I wouldn't ignore Angry Frank for sure.
Well, sorry, let me make a point. Only gets you so far.
Say that again, Frank.
Anger only gets you so far.
I know. I'm teasing you.
No, but this is an important point to make to people to make. So, sure, I was angry one time, and sure, I can get angry now. And anger is a legitimate emotion that we ought to give space for. But you're not going to get very far if anger is the only tool in your box.
Absolutely. And it's quite exhausting, isn't it, being angry?
Yeah, we've got to work with people. We've got to understand the difficulties and frustrations other people have when they come to the table.
So tell me about that in terms of, and sort of my understanding of the advocacy nature of it is because you want to raise the profile, you want to get people on board, you want to give voices to people who've been hidden, give tools and resources to people who have been victimized so that they can advocate for themselves and stand up for themselves and give voice to their experience. And personal experience is a very powerful thing. It's a really powerful tool to give people, particularly people who've been forced into voicelessness because of fear and assault, for example. It's really important that they can speak.
Absolutely, and something I'm really proud of just late is we've developed a service to help children have a voice in domestic homicide reviews.
Wow.
So we have 2 specialist advocates now helping children. So whilst I'm not an expert in this area at all, I met Professor Mullane Moore in America a few years ago, and she said to me, look, Frank, in this part of the world, we teach children the correct response to trauma is silence. And then we wonder why it's functional behavior later. Yeah. So what concerns me is quite often the stock answer you get from some safeguarding professionals, if you say, can we include the children in this review of the murder? No, we don't want to re-traumatize them. But nobody is measuring the trauma cost to those children by ignoring them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's on a case-by-case basis, and it does require specialist child workers.
Yeah.
Some children want to be heard, want to have their voice heard, and they know things that are relevant and helpful to the review.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a childcare professional. And what I would say is, I don't have a simple stock answer to a question like that. That it has to be thoroughly investigated with the child. And one of the core principles of working with children is to give them a voice and to allow them and support them in finding what it is that they want. You know, and
give them status. Give them status.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. And to give them importance and value their contribution. Obviously, there's developmental issues, and you know, we may put boundaries on children, like, no, you can't have the chocolate. That aside, you know, there are significant issues, I think, around how we support children in coming to an informed decision about something. And this is, I mean, I totally get. I'm just checking. Sorry, I was getting a WhatsApp message. I was wondering if it was a message for you, but it's not. I totally get why somebody would be cautious about wanting a child in some sort of paralegal situation that might bring up events. But to say a blanket no doesn't seem right. Neither does a blanket yes. It seems to me that there has to be a set of assessment tools that can go into thinking about whether it would be helpful for an individual child to be part of that process, you know. So,
and I think it's about skilled professionals also talking with these children.
Yeah.
So the whole model of the charity that I run is built on the concept of status, raising the status.
Yeah, I get that.
Parties, raising the status of the crime.
Yeah, I mean, which I think is really important. And the way I relate to it is I think about, you know, for example, we make assumptions and speak for people when what we should be doing is listening to and learning from them.
Well, can I just say, I'm so pleased you said that, because one of the things that has really frustrated me down the years is people making assumptions about what's right for bereaved families.
Yeah.
Bereaved families are as different as everybody else.
Right, exactly.
All sorts of backgrounds. Always ask people rather than assume. I'll give an example.
Yeah.
So in domestic homicide reviews, sometimes professionals make the assumption it's wrong to publish the review on the anniversary of the murder because that will traumatize the family. Other families will say, can't think of a better date, actually. Why didn't you ask us?
Yeah. Also, I mean, this thing about events don't traumatize people, that's not really what happens. And I'm speaking here as a mental health professional. What happens is it's our response to the event. It's traumatic functioning as a consequence of an event. But one person may develop traumatic functioning, another person may not. And actually, and again, this is another trigger thing, if people are experiencing concerns around this issue about trauma, and that would be flashbacks and depression, maybe substance abuse, foreshortening, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, shame attacks, these types of things that are associated with traumatic functioning. Again, we have some fantastic help for people these days. It's not like World War II when Daddy wasn't going to get help and had to shut up. You know, there's loads of amazing services that you can get from the NHS through NHS psychotherapies, or you can get them privately. If you're going to get them privately, make sure they're appropriately qualified, etc. But things like EMDR, Rewind, CBT, brilliant sort of psychological therapies that exist. So if you are getting triggered by this stuff, just know there's some brilliant treatments available that will help super quick. Actually, EMDR is super quick.
That's the rapid eye movement.
Yeah. EMDR is a sort of gold standard trauma treatment. I know one of my team at the moment is jumping up and down because he's an EMDR specialist. He's a real advocate. But there's a whole range of stuff that you can do. So what I'm saying is you don't have to suffer with this stuff. And there's a whole raft of skills that you can learn, which are trauma reducing and improve resilience as well. We know from ACEs and things like that who's more likely to suffer from difficulties around resilience. So again, don't suffer alone, folks. Talk to your GP, check out psychological therapies within the NHS, investigate it for yourself, and talk to advocacy groups. In terms of how people might get help Do you provide groups and support, Frank? Is that the way it works, or?
Yes, we do. We run residentials. We provide weekly peer support groups online.
Great.
For bereaved families bereaved by fatal domestic abuse, because it's not just homicides, it's suicides and all sorts of deaths.
Yeah. And how would people get hold of the organisation and join these supports and services?
www.AAFDA.
Say that again, because your sound went. So
sure. So EA, so the letters for Advocacy After Fatal Domestic Abuse.org. You just Google it, and there's a telephone number and an email address on there.
And James will put the link out as well. So that's www.aafda.org. And people can get contact details there. They can get information about the services that your charity, and they can just get information about how to give you money, I hope. I hope that's on your website as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much.
It's, you are a remarkable person, Frank. That's the truth, and doing some remarkable things and fighting for an area of experience to have some light on it that has been in the dark for far too long, And as an adult child of this stuff, I really thank you for what you're doing, because my experience growing up as a kid around this stuff was that it was my norm, and it was like nobody saw it. And yet I was terrorized by it, It was but it was like, it didn't matter, but it does matter. And if you're a victim of this stuff, it really, really matters. And some of us actually care about you deeply.
Thank you. I could easily have been there the night of the murders, as I often was there. Yeah. I would be dead too. So I had the chance to have a go, and that's what I'm doing. Yeah. It helps me. Let's be honest. It helps me.
I can see that, which is great. I mean, I totally get it. Everybody I speak to who's transformative they're doing it because they want to. That's the secret. It's not because they think they're going to rise to some higher plane of existence. They're living their best life. That's what you're getting out of it. So, listen, we do have to stop, I'm afraid. You stay there, Frank. Don't go anywhere. We have to stop tonight, folks. Again, there's lots of links and organizations that we talked about. This is really tough stuff to talk about. And if you feel upset by it, then I'm not surprised. Okay. If you feel upset by it, go and talk to somebody if it's safe to talk to them. Find somebody that's safe to talk to. If you're at risk at the moment, get hold of refuge and sort of get some professional help around these issues. If you've just been triggered around the talk around suicide, think about things like the Samaritans are a brilliant organisation that you can reach out to. And you can reach out to them when you're not in crisis. I would encourage you to have a chat with Samaritans at any time, particularly if you're somebody who lives alone, for example. They're really always there to have a chat.
Noel, can I just quickly say that I call the Samaritans occasionally. Yeah. They offer emotional support.
That's right.
You don't have to be suicidal to call them.
Not at all. Not at all. And in fact, let's prevent those feelings from happening by asking and talking to people well before you're in that sort of dire situation. So, folks, there's a lot of fantastic help out there. Look at the links that we've sent out. Do not suffer on your own with these things. I'll see you all next week. I have no idea who I've got on, but I never do, so that's all right. But what an amazing evening that we've had with Frank. And, see you next week. You stay there, Frank. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. Catch you on the flip.